Recently, you saw a bunch of headlines concerning UFOs and the American Air Force, and no matter if you view this strictly as a military topic in terms of radar spoofing, pretending there are planes that don't actually exist, and advanced aircraft and that sort of thing, or if you're interested in the question about possible extraterrestrials, no matter where you stand on this issue, you have to be aware that the United States Air Force has been caught engaging in active disinformation, actually running assets, people who were very popular in the UFO activist movement, and this of course was bleeding over into the broader conspiracy movement. Now, we've been asked specifically to comment on Milton William Cooper, who was a big shot in the 1990s in conspiracy circles, but he originally started in UFO circles, and this all kind of meshed together and sort of became an influence on the television show The X-Files. Milton Cooper, everybody calls him Bill, published his book Behold a Pale Horse in 1991. He had a radio show and he was very popular with the militia movement. Now, he covered a wide variety of topics, sort of the bread and butter of the conspiracy buff circles, and he was also pretty heavy involved in discussions about UFOs and extraterrestrials. He promoted ideas that others had been promoting, that a super secret government group was in connection with intelligent life species from other planets. Now, many Americans, according to research, believe that UFO sightings and all these things, that they are an indicator of actual aliens and that sort of thing. So you have a broad group in society that is accessible to these ideas. So that is partially because of Hollywood movies, and that is also partially because you see people from the military active or retired, and they talk about what they supposedly saw. And that gives this whole thing credibility. However, the United States Air Force has been caught in widespread disinformation, so you have to be careful about these things. So Cooper apparently served in the United States Navy, but it's not exactly clear how important he was. He claims he was super, super important, and he had sort of access, or he gained access to even more secret material. And he claimed to have seen UFOs the size of aircraft carriers. And so Cooper never really delivered, the evidence, the hard evidence. He presented all kinds of documents that he probably made up himself, or he referenced other people's claims about documents. And that never really materialized. And of course, the Air Force supplied false documents to activists. So now in modern times, you have seen certain frauds being exposed of all kinds. So pretty much the dominating kind of hoax is the stolen valor. If somebody claims to have been a Navy SEAL, or somebody claims to have been in CIA secret clandestine operations, and of course it was so secret there's no records of it, so you have to take these people at face value and that sort of thing. So that's kind of something that you have to watch out for when you're looking at Milton Cooper. So it was not exactly difficult at the time to make certain claims, and you didn't have today's tools to double check and triple check people's stories. And so that was a big problem. You also had conspiracy authors such as Bo Gritz, who legitimately served in the military, even special forces. And there was a rivalry between Cooper and Bo Gritz, and they really hated each other. That was something interesting back at the time. And in his book, that became a bestseller in the 90s. In his book, Cooper talks about his own life story first and what he supposedly saw. His parents, they were sort of like John Wayne, he claims, and the mother was supposedly sort of a southern angelic country figure, that sort of thing. Cooper claims to have served with the Navy, and he served with the submarine naval fleet, and it all sounds like a bunch of cliches tacked together, cliches from movies, television shows, and novels. So he was looking around, he says, and then he saw the supposed UFO the size of an aircraft carrier, like the biggest thing ever. So this thing came out of the water, moved into the clouds, and then dove back into the water. Now, normally these kind of stories are being told in regards to what they claim to have seen on radar screens, and with advanced radar spoofing, you can actually fake flying objects that seem very large, unrealistically large, or unrealistically agile or fast. But it's a whole nother thing if you claim to have seen a UFO the size of an aircraft carrier. And so the Navy covered it up, he said, and then he claims to have been involved in secret operations within the Navy, and it all sounds like the movie Apocalypse Now. Special medals and highest commendations and all that stuff, he claims, and he tells you more UFO stories from Vietnam. That's what he claims. Then he applied for a even higher posting, and he was asked if he had ever joined any sort of secret societies or brotherhoods, and he ticked the box that said Demolay Society, and he was supposedly a member of it, and that's how he got drafted into this higher rank, he claims. He talks about top secret material, Q-sensitive compartmentalized, which is not really the correct term. It's supposed to be sensitive compartmented information or special access programs. And in his new rank, he claims to have had access to secrets such as the murder of President John F. Kennedy and that sort of thing. And and when he retired, he was hunted, apparently, by the big conspiracy. He was supposedly driven down a cliff with his car, and these supposed hitmen thought he was dead. They didn't make sure, as you would expect from professionals. They just left him, and he supposedly survived. Right. So not very believable, and of course there's no real evidence. And then in 1987, in the 80s, you saw a big hype in the UFO activist movement, and that's when Cooper joined that movement, and he latched onto those things that were already popular. So in 1987, UFO activists Bill Moore, James Shandera, and Stanton Friedman published the supposed Majestic 12 documents, and that was about a secret government group communicating with the aliens and making deals with the aliens. These documents, of course, were fake, and that created a stir in the scene. Everybody was accusing everybody. And these UFO activists, they were constantly monitoring Air Force bases, especially Area 51, which dealt with secret advanced aircraft, stealth bombers, the SR-71, the super high-speed plane, and that sort of thing. So the Air Force was concerned just about the secrecy of these new airplanes and other experiments that were done. There was also a concern that the Soviet intelligence agency KGB would infiltrate UFO circles in order to monitor United States Air Force bases and gain some sort of information to acquire secrets and make photos and that sort of thing. So that's why the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, FOSI, hatched out the plan to spread false information about aliens and UFOs and to get this information to the UFO activists. Leading UFO activists were actually recruited by the Air Force as informants and spreaders of disinformation. So this was done very professionally and carefully. The US Air Force supplied fake documents to these people claiming those were real, or mostly real. And in return, the UFO activist was supposed to give the Air Force information about anything important happening in activist circles. So somebody photographed some new thing or saw some wreckage, photographed the wreckage. That was interesting to you in the United States Air Force. That's how this worked. And so then in 1989, there was a big UFO conference. It was called the MUFON conference. And leading activist Bill Moore got on stage and then admitted that he had been attached for years to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. So he confessed, basically. He claimed he got documents and he supplied information to the Air Force. And that's how these phony sensations happened, such as the Majestic 12 documents. So UFO circles were shocked about this confession, and people were arguing with each other, you know, who was a rat, who was not a rat, and all that sort of thing. And then we learned, for example, about the activist Paul Benevitz. So he was interested in UFOs, and he had the small airplane, and he was zooming around New Mexico all the time, photographing anything he believed was connected to UFOs and alien life forms. In 1985, he possibly photographed a stealth plane that had crashed. So Benevitz gave his photographs to the UFO activist Bill Moore, who then handed them over to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And so the Air Force decided to feed Benevitz false information and to literally drive him insane. This has been documented in the book Mirageman from 2010, and in 2013 there was also a documentary with the same name. So that's basically what happened. So they gave this Benevitz guy a computer with a manipulative computer program which was supposed to decipher secret radio communications. And so this program gave out just gibberish, but Benevitz believed that gibberish was actually alien communications, and he was going literally insane. And in 1988, 1 year after these fake documents called Majestic 12, Cooper appeared on the scene. He posted in the Paranet forum about UFO topics, and he made his grand claims that he was in the United States Navy and he saw this big UFO the size of an aircraft carrier and that sort of thing. Within days, he was contacted by a man called John Olson Lear, son of the Learjet corporate founder Bill Lear. And John Lear told a story that he was a pilot who's flown missions for the CIA, and Lear posted stuff about the Majestic 12 myth and that sort of thing. So then you saw sort of a cooperation and a friendship between Cooper and Lear between 1988 and 1999. So they spent a lot of time together. And the suspicion is that John Lear was also involved in active disinformation and that he worked with Cooper to spread false information. In 1989, Cooper and Lear published a document accusing the United States government of colluding with aliens and that sort of thing. And they demanded that all information were made public. So, same year, 1989, this MUFON conference happened where Bill Moore confessed in tears that he was involved in disinformation and that the United States Air Force drove Paul Benevitz crazy. So this conference was supposed to have been a victory lap for the movement. Everybody was adding stuff to the myth, and they were all congratulating each other on how great these Majestic 12 documents were. Biggest sensation in human history. most important thing in the world. And then a leading activist told everyone that this was all fake, or mostly fake. And so then the this Lear guy, had actually been involved in this conference, and he was pushing for certain guests to promote the myth, to promote those lies. That's important to understand. And this Lear guy was not just working Cooper, he was also working people such as Bob Lazar. And Lazar, he claims to be this elite physicist who worked in Area 51. He supposedly studied and saw this alien technology. But in reality, he just visited community college in Los Angeles. So he was not really a big shot from MIT and Caltech, and there's no real evidence for his story. And of course, he claimed that the government was covering up his career, his life. And so still today, these guys such as Lazar, they're invited to the Joe Rogan podcast and popular shows. So this stuff gets repeated again and again and again. So then in his book, in the early 90s, Cooper had to address this controversy, right? Because Cooper had been promoting the myth, he had been promoting the lie, which was then exposed. So Cooper had to adjust his own story to make himself look good. So then he came up with a story that he always knew about a plan to spread disinformation, and he was aware of the plan, and he knew who was a rat who was collaborating with the government. And this emergency plan was called Majestic. That was Cooper's story. And it looks like Cooper believed all sorts of nonsense, and Cooper fell for all sorts of nonsense. But then when it was exposed, he claimed to have been 10 steps ahead of everybody else. So, yeah, Cooper didn't look good, but of course he blamed everybody else. And he claimed that once people got too close to the truth, certain assets, certain agents were supposed to spread false information to discredit the actual truth and to discredit those good professional UFO researchers. And yeah, in 1990, the publication UFO magazine came up with a series of reports about Cooper and his behavior. So they kind of exposed his contradictions and his lack of evidence, and he basically contradicted himself a bunch of times. So in 1989, Cooper was interviewed by Paul Shepard, and then he talked about some above top secret program, a magic classification controlled by Magic, the Majestic Agency for Joint Intelligence, which handles the relationship with the aliens, supposedly. And so then the MUFON conference happened. Then Cooper said, well, anybody who's talking about the Majestic program, everybody who talks about that is a disinformation agent and he's fake. And so that was his new story. And then UFO activists, they demanded that Cooper present some of his actual documents that he photocopied, supposedly. They wanted to see some actual documents. But Cooper claimed his garage burned down, so these documents are gone, and he didn't actually say where he lived, so people would have been able to confirm that there was an actual fire, because that would have been public information at that point. In his book, Behold a Pale Horse, Cooper claims that he just played the idiot. He played the guy who didn't really know anything, and but of course he was 10 steps ahead and that sort of thing. And government agents confiscated material that he had, and that was his new story. So even in 1991, in his book, Cooper still continued this myth that he was this big shot in the Navy. He had access to secret documents, and he still claimed that President Eisenhower had this group called Majesty 12. Not Majestic 12, but Majesty 12. Also known as Majority 12. And this Majesty 12, that is the relevant group that handles the relationships with the aliens. And this was also connected, he said, to the Jason group of scientists. So Cooper actually disregarded, the stuff that had been exposed as fake, but he still creates the same kind of myth, and he continues that sort of myth. And so this whole book, Behold a Pale Horse, it only partially dealt with aliens. It mostly dealt with regular conspiracy topics. And this book was of a really, really bad quality. I mean, if you compare this to, let's say, these older books from the John Birch Society, Cooper's book was crazy bad. I mean, it was crazy bad. And people to this day don't fully realize this, even though you can just check that out for yourself. So I've just broken it down chapter by chapter. It's really not that... It's really not that complex. I mean, it tries to appear complex, but it really isn't. So, chapter 1, he covers this document called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, which is not a real document, and nobody knows who actually came up with this fake. And so, this is just gibberish. It's just a little bit of this, a little bit of that. There's no real structure, and somehow the Rothschilds were manipulating all of this. So, it's really, really a terrible chapter that has no meaning whatsoever. Chapter 2 is concerned with secret societies and the New World Order, which means that he just adds together some bits and pieces, and he throws together some names, and this group is connected to this other group in that way, and that way, and that way. So he really didn't have any special information. He really was an expert, and this is also a really bad chapter. He promotes the book Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which is based on a total fake, total myth. He claims to know where the secret was hidden in France and that sort of stuff. And he lists as sources authors such as William Guy Carr, Eustace Mullins, and John Robinson, which means he was just the average conspiracy buff who had no special information. So chapter 3 is also content lifted from somewhere else. This is supposed to be the introduction oath of a not really identified secret order. And this document was handed to him, so he just publishes it without really checking if this was true. And so he lists some source, apparently another source from the Library of Congress and that sort of thing, but that was not a real source. This is what was mentioned in government circles as an example for disinformation. So now we have 3 chapters that have no value whatsoever. Chapter 4 is the secret contract of Verona, which is also fake. Chapter 5 is just gibberish about the New World Order, and his list of sources is basically what he copied. Chapter 6 is about FEMA and martial law. And he's quoting Herbert Quindy from the LaRouche publication Executive Intelligence Report, which many conspiracy authors have used as a source, the EIR. Later, this EIR author, Quindy, got a high-paying job as an IT guy for the prison administration of Illinois. And so this prison administration said that Quind had actually spied against the LaRouche organization and that publication and gave that information to the U.S. intelligence community. Right. Another source that Cooper uses is the magazine Spotlight from the Anti-Semitic Liberty Lobby. So this is just not good sources at all. Chapter 7 deals with legislation against drug use, and some commentary on a proposed law, so it's not really that interesting. Chapter 8 deals with police state laws for Oklahoma, and this stuff was taken from other sources, so it's just copy and paste. Chapter 9, finally we get something from Cooper himself, but it's just gibberish. You know, he just tacks together some bits and pieces. You know, this group and that group and this and that, and you know that's all he does. Chapter 10, external content, copy and paste. Chapter 11 is the transcript of an interview between Cooper and a man called Randall Terpstra, which nobody knows and which is completely ridiculous and pointless. Chapter 12 deals with MJ-12, so the controversy about UFOs, aliens, and what the government knew about it. So this chapter is based on Cooper's stuff, which he wanted to present at the MUFON conference in 1989. So now he talks about top secret magic material that he supposedly had access to, so he can't let that topic slide. He has to write about it. So then he claims projects such as Project Grudge, Project Pounds, Red Light, Snowbird, Joshua, Excalibur, stuff that probably never even existed. He talks about President Eisenhower and this group to communicate with the aliens called Majesty 12, MJ-12. So it's not Majestic 12. Oh no, if somebody talks about Majestic 12, that would be disinformation. He talks about Majesty 12. Totally silly. So the aliens had a contract with the humans, but the aliens broke the contract and they scammed Eisenhower. So all that intergalactic drama and soap opera, it pretty much sounds like the old novel Dune by Frank Herbert. Of course, Cooper mentions the emergency plan if people got too close to the truth. This plan, called Majestic 12, would launch, and these other UFO researchers would then spread disinformation. Right. And so, there's no real evidence in that chapter in any sort of way, and he always blames some other people if things don't pan out. Then, chapter 13 about the United Nations and the New World Order. Nothing really interesting in that chapter. Chapter 14, called A Proposed Constitutional Model for the New States of America. This is just external content, copy and paste, and it's possible that he copied that stuff without respecting the copyright and without actually asking the person who wrote this.Chapter 15 is simply consists of the Protocols of Zion, specific translation, which was done by high-level British circles, which is total disinformation, by the way. You can check out some other videos about that. British intelligence not just ran the banks and the central bank, Bank of England, they also ran basically these conspiracy narratives that people have grown accustomed to. And so a lot of high-level Brits, noble British circles, they spread all this stuff and to deceive people. And so Cooper says this document is sort of real, but you have to not read it in terms of Jews versus non-Jews. You have to read it in terms of Illuminati versus average people, which is really super lame. And this is just an excuse for him to reprint the Protocols of Zion because he couldn't actually write a book. He was not able to come up with interesting content. He just reprinted other people's stuff. Chapter 16 is the story of Jonathan May, who was a fraud, and he marketed himself as a hero against the central bank, Federal Reserve. Pointless chapter. Chapter 17 is external content about the military officer Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, who confessed to being a Satanist. Interesting topic in itself, but nothing really new in this chapter. So that is basically it. Later in the book, you see some documents being reprinted, but that really doesn't mean anything. So Cooper became sort of famous with his book. He's done his radio show called Hour of the Time, and he was really, really lonely in the White Mountains, Arizona, next to the border to New Mexico. And he sent his tapes to radio stations, and that's how he marketed himself, right? And he, of course, he had some issues with the IRS. He didn't really pay his taxes and that sort of thing, and he kept threatening the government. And for a long time, the government never really came to arrest him. So at some point, he became he was labeled a fugitive with the United States Marshals Service. So he wasn't important. He was never a threat to the government, and the government for years never really came to arrest him or anything. Now, at some point, Cooper had an incident with his neighbors, and so that kind of led to a visit by local police. So it wasn't special forces or anything. You know, it wasn't some secret group that secretly poisoned him or made him disappear. No, it was just regular police. And then there was a shootout, and Cooper ended up dead. And some of his fans, they tried to paint him as a martyr. So he was this figure that died in the fight against the New World Order and that sort of thing. But for years and years, Cooper had not been a priority for the government. Cooper didn't have a group behind him. He was not leader of a big militia or anything, and he was not visited by special agents. He was visited by regular police. And Cooper's behavior is indicative of the narcissistic spectrum and that sort of thing. So he was a very, very troublesome personality. And he always claimed to be special and have special information, whereas none of what he did, none of what he wrote was actually special. So check out the book Mirageman. It's fairly interesting. You can see how the United States Air Force manipulated UFO circles and activist circles. You should be aware of these things, and there's also some good information in there about radar spoofing and advanced technology that is being used in warfare and will be used in the future in warfare.